This is Michael Stahnke, my boss. Flox as a guided path for Nix.
All right. The most difficult part of giving this talk is they want me to stay on this little stage, and that is not how I roll. So if I apologize to those watching on the internet, I will not be in frame at times. All right, I'm going to talk about Flox as a guided path for Nix, and I'm going to be the first one to say that I do not know a ton about Nix, but I do know a lot about Flox, and I've run engineering there, I've run product there for a little bit. It's awesome. I'm having a great time learning more about it, but I'm going to talk about some of the warts we've uncovered and some of the things that, as a newer user of Nix, that I've found interesting. We'll say that. So, first thing is, this is not a sales pitch for Flox. As much as Ron would love this to be a sales pitch for Flox, it is not. It's about thoughts and approach. I am really talking about the reasons and the why that we've built Flox and what we've done for it and how we think about the process. And a lot of this is other people's thoughts that I'm collecting and aggregating and resharing with you. These are not solely my ideas. A bit about me, I used to have hair, and I used to have a really long beard. And neither of these things are true anymore, but I still like the drawing, so I use it often. I worked at Caterpillar, Puppet, Circle CI, and now at Flox. So I'll talk a little bit about some of these experiences. I also wrote a book called Pro Open SSH like 20 years ago at this point. Wow, that's a long time. And I founded this Apple repository. If you ever used RHEL or CentOS, I was one of the people that created that. Yeah, so, and the reason I did that, anyway, yeah, thanks. I haven't been involved with it for a few years, but it was a really great time. The reason I did that primarily was I wanted a bunch of Ruby stuff in Apple because I was a big Puppet user. So like it was self-serving all the way through. But as part of that, I went to go work at Puppet, and then I was working on packaging a ton. And so I have packaged for basically every operating system that is Unix-like that has ever existed, and some you've never heard of. And it's not that it's this big problem, but the point is, I guess, I'm not a newbie to packaging at all. And when I got to this Nix thing, I was like, why does this feel so foreign to me? So that's going to be some of the theme of some of this. So for 15 years, I've basically been doing infrastructure development and developer tooling vendors between Circle CI, Puppet, and now Flox. But when I first saw Nix, I read the paper when it first came out, or shortly after it first came out. How did that happen? Wow. Okay. And what I really thought was, okay, so some Haskell people decided package management was just too simple, and they needed to change it. That was basically my impression of what I saw when I read the Nix paper. And it just didn't make sense to me, and I was like, okay, it needs a new language, fine, whatever. And then my FHS was gone, and I know a lot about FHS because if you've ever been a maintainer for Fedora or RHEL or Debian or whatever, it's just first principle. You have to know everything about FHS, and if you violate it in any way, your package gets rejected and you get told you're terrible at life. So I learned a little bit about Nix, and I was like, okay, I don't understand a lot of this. It seems really weird. It's foreign to me in every way. I didn't look at it again for years. But at Puppet, I did packaging all these things. We wrote our own tooling. We built our own CI system. Next time I saw Nix, I was at Circle CI. So I had done all this packaging and all this other stuff, and I was at Circle CI, and I had a team that was focused on developer enablement. Yeah, I really cannot stand still. Okay. I was focused on developer enablement, and the things that mattered were how fast can we get the next team online and to work on this service. When you have 200 plus microservices and 30 teams, people are jumping around a lot into different services, and so how do they get started? We found some consistencies able to use Nix, and there were some teams that were like, this is great, I love this, and there were other teams that said, what are you doing to me? I am never going to touch this. This hurts too much. Okay, well, eventually Flox kind of pings me, and they're like, hey, we're looking for a leader for engineering. We think your background's really interesting, and I was like, okay, and so I love developer productivity package. I love tooling. I love packaging. I was like, let's check it out. Let's go do this Nix thing. So I'm a new Nix user. My first thought is, why is this so complicated? I have all these things that are like purity and shell and flakes and closure, and not closure, because I was more familiar with closure than I was with closures. And then store path, derivations, profiles, expressions. Oh, familiar with closure does not mean I liked it, by the way. But there was all these new things to learn that were just words that didn't map in my brain to anything else. when I said, how do you install a package, the answer I got was, what do you mean by install? And my response was, what do you mean, what do I mean? I'm asking to install a piece of software. And they're like, well, do you want to be able to use it? No, I just want to eat up some disk space. Like, what? Okay. So there was a lot of stuff, there were other problems like, okay, I couldn't find headers if I installed things a certain way, or I couldn't find a library. There was like the shell and there was the develop, but they weren't the same thing, but they felt really similar. And there was these experimental features, like being able to use a space. So it was really weird. Commands with spaces require extra arguments to say, yes, I want to be able to run commands with spaces. And I know a lot of you are thinking, but the reasons are valid. The outcome is ridiculous. Because as a new user, I have to say every time I want to use a thing that has a space in it, oh, enable experimental features. And they're like, well, you just go edit your nix.conf. You know what? Somebody has to tell you to do that. And why do I need to enable experimental features just to have a command with a space in it that, as far as I can tell, does the exact same thing as the command without the space in it in like 90% of cases? So anyway, weird thing. So the other thing is you start with your build and then you write code. And I'm a release engineer by trade. Builds are my jam. This is awesome. What are we doing? We're starting with a build? Building what? Let me define my build. I'm going to define all the dependencies that I have. For what? I haven't written any software. It doesn't matter. Start with your build. Okay. Nix is weird, man. So Nix basically is like, hey, would you just like to start in the deep end? And the answer for me was, I felt like I was a really good swimmer already. I felt like I was basically like at the Olympic level. I packaged for AIX and Solaris and HPUX and every Linux. Like I've done Yocto distributions from the ground up. I can tell you the scars of how Cisco's Nexus line is built internally. Like it is so much junk. And I was like, okay, they called it swimming. It's not swimming. This is like the people that train for triathlons by attaching the bicycle to their back and then jumping into the water. It was like that. So, all right, so let's take a step back. What is Nix awesome at, though? Because Nix has some really, really cool stuff going on. I've got reproducibility. That's pretty cool. We worked really hard on that on some different Linux distributions. And if you ever watched the Debian guide of how to get reproducibility through, they did a lot of really cool stuff. It probably helped the Nix upstream in a lot of ways. But man, was it painful. Cross-platform stuff, always awesome. Trying out new software. I love to try out new software all the time. So that's really cool. Caching builds and tests. Okay, now you're piquing my interest. As somebody who worked at a CI company, anytime you can cache things and skip tests, life is awesome. And this huge, huge package repository. But the problem with Nix was it basically started with, you must unlearn what you have learned. Now the problem is I've heard this somewhere before, and I really didn't like where it ended up and where it took me. And so I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here. I'll get back in the camera frame for a minute. But this is the CNCF. That's just the infrastructure. That's just the platform section of the CNCF. So there's a lot going on here. And this was I have to unlearn what I have learned. And then you have to overcome all of the deficiencies or the inaccuracies or the incompleteness of different parts of the CNCF landscape by getting more parts of the CNCF landscape in your tooling. So basically, every time you have a new problem, you solve it with another layer. And every time that layer introduces a new problem, the only thing you can do is introduce another layer. And so now we're just turtles all the way down through CNCF tools. And you end up with microservices that look something like this. I'm not going to say that I pulled that directly from a place I used to work, but I'm going to say that I may have. And so you have all these services, and then you're like, hey, that's the thing that's broken. Cool. How do you find that? It's really, really, really hard. Distributed debugging is the hardest thing in the world, and you can go back to these original Kernighan and Rishi, kind of quotes, but basically, if debugging takes a better brain than it does to author it, don't ever write clever code because you won't be able to figure anything out. That's more or less what it says. So, why did I go off on that tangent? I'm going to come back to that in a second. I have a desire for simplicity. Fewer choices lead to better outcomes. I have a desire for Nix benefits. Cool, Cool, all right. I want simple Nix, I think is what I'm going for here. I have a desire for cross-platform work. Okay, that's cool. So we want workflows where a developer can have a way to contribute to a project, usually locally. Because what I've found is I've tried to build out things that look like dev containers or remote cloud environments for developers or whatever. I've tried to do that 4 different times at different companies. Developers will resist you every step of the way when you take away their ability to develop on their laptop. I know you can say, hey, I do it all the time without it. Cool, do you like it? Because what I've found is they don't. And I tried really, really hard with different solutions. So anyway, they want things locally. Set environment variables in some way, configure the environment, run some tests, you know, basically use their editor, use their preferences. They want it to feel like home. They want it to feel like their computer while they're doing their development. That's a really cool thing. But I had to unlearn what I've learned. But why do I have to do that? We've done a lot in the last 20 years doing cloud native tech, cloud native architecture. There are a lot of really cool tools that have come out. And I'll dog on Kubernetes all day because I think it's overly complex and most people don't have problems that it actually addresses, but we've all landed there, okay? Cool. What have we learned? What can we take away from all of these infrastructure and cloud tools? Quite a bit. But at the same time, there was this other parallel track of technology going through that was called Nix. And what have we learned doing that in the last 20 years? Okay, can I combine those together? Can I combine those without abandoning all the existing knowledge? Can I debug using strace? So anyway, the thing is with cloud native architecture, we've also thrown away some of the things that were awesome about Unix and about Linux and about these other ways of operating systems. Multi-user is a thing that has more or less died in a cloud native world. All these systems are there to run one process or one container under one thing. We're not doing process quotas. We're not having hundreds and hundreds of users having terminals on these things anymore. And those are powerful, powerful systems that we just basically walked away from and saying that was too difficult, so we're just going to spin up N of them with a single tenant on them in a lot of cases. We don't debug using shell. We launched debug pods and debug tooling. Heck, there's a whole industry that you will see at the Expo Hall or if you're at reInvent or KubeCon or whatever of just people telling you how to debug things in cloud native world. It's a hard problem. I get why it's there. But what if we just didn't have the problem instead of having all the tools to solve the problem? And process and user accounting. So I have all these things. I added complexity when I do cloud native because now I also get into IAM as a really hard problem, a really fun problem. And then I'm just, paying for monitoring services that monitor my other monitoring services that monitor my other monitoring services so I can make sure it's all good. And just to add insult to injury, you also have to use YAML to do all those things. So there's a lot to like about cloud native architecture. There's a lot not to like about it. But there's a lot to like about traditional Unix and Linux concepts. And these are the things that these were established in like the 70s and they're still awesome today. And I think that is remarkable for whoever designed these systems. But why are they mutually exclusive? So let's build upon the power of Nix. I want a simplicity of an environment that you can work on in your shell. Okay. I want to be able to search and install packages. And I will say that my experience with Nix search was a little weird. There was like a lowercase I and an uppercase A, and I had to have Nix packages with like a hash in there to go say this is what I want to search. All of that felt very weird to me when I could just do yum search package name or apt cache package name or brew search package name or, go on and on and on and on and on. It was nothing like these. I just wanted to install things. And I wanted install to do exactly what I thought I meant when I say install. It meant I want to be able to have the bits on disk, be able to run the bits on disk, or look at the bits on disk from other places if it was like a library or whatever. I didn't think this was controversial. I want specific versions of packages to be available. This was what I kept hearing about Nix was it's a continuous release, and so they have all these things, and I was like, cool, how do I get an old version? And they're like, well, do you like git bisect? And I was like, actually, I do like git bisect. That's awesome. And then they were like, cool, no one else does. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. So, and what I was looking for also was just this idea of no variance. Like if it works on my computer, I want it to work on yours. And I don't just mean that from a meme perspective. I mean like if I want to actually contribute to this project and I want my buddy to contribute to this project, it shouldn't be, oh, well, I set it up this way, but you have to set it up this other way because you're on Ubuntu and I'm on a Mac. Like that's just not great. So what I wanted the workflow to be, what I felt like was going to work the best from everybody I'd ever talked to in life that had never heard of Nix was I want to develop some software, then build it, and then operate it. Cool. We called that an SDLC when I was in computer science class. So the other thing I wanted to be able to do was, I want you to be able to do partial SDLC adoption for the tooling. Because if you do the whole thing, it's such a big lift, you just don't move. I need to be able to meet you where you are. So, starting with the build is a super unfamiliar thing. And that's kind of where Nix starts. You start with your definition, you have a Nix file there, here's how I would build this project or whatever. That's a little weird. I wanted a thing that I could share how I worked with my colleagues, like with production. I could share it from development to production. I could share it with my colleagues. I could share it with my friends, coworkers, strangers, children, others. And so as we were making Flox, one of the main things we were thinking about was, how do I make this learning curve not feel like I just jumped into the deep end of the pool? It's not to say that we wanted to make Nix with training wheels. It's not. We wanted to build upon the power of Nix and do something a little different. But our goal here was to make it easier to level up than to just be like, I don't know what I'm doing, don't know what I'm doing. I have to learn everything, and now I'm awesome. We were like, okay, let's learn a little bit, learn a little bit, learn a bit. Okay, you're happy now. And I think that's okay. So, our complexity here was, if you know Nix, great. We want to help you with that. Perhaps this can help you get Nix into your company or into the projects you're working on. What we found talking to a bunch of Nix users and Nix advocates was, if you ran Nix in a company, in almost all cases, there was one, possibly two, if you were extremely lucky, people that could make changes to that system and drive it through the business. And that meant that Nix adoption didn't happen in a lot of cases inside of companies. As a leader, I would have never allowed that to come through. If there was exactly one person that could make changes to a system, heck no. That is a risk that is unacceptable. So we had to make sure that that risk profile could change significantly. What we have found is that with Flox, a lot of people that love Nix can now still use all their Nix tooling, and they love it, but they can also get their colleagues to use Flox tooling, and they're happy. And we've met in the middle. Excellent. So if you're new to Nix, I would really hope that Flox would be an easier approach, because it should feel more like a traditional package manager that you've used. It should feel a lot more like a virtual environment manager that you've probably used before, whether it was Python, Ruby, Node, whatever. And that we want the modern SDLC, they actually want the properties of Nix. You've seen people go out of their way to do things with Docker containers that mimic reproducibility that is child's play next to what Nix can do. You've seen them do workflows of, hey, we can share this, it works on your computer, it works on mine, until you realize that one person's on an ARM chip and the other one's on x86, and you're like, oh, that actually doesn't work as cross-platform as I wish it did. But there's all these Nix benefits, and so I just keep coming back to this. Gosh, I want these in people's hands. Well, Flox, we centered around environments. Our unit of work throughout the entire system is this thing called a Flox environment. And an environment is a collection of packages, environment variables, hooks, and services, so it can feel a little bit kind of like Docker Compose. It can feel like I can share this environment with you. If you're on a Mac and I'm on Linux and I'm on x86 and you're on ARM, great. At install time, we figure all of that out when we're creating the environment. So we know the environment works everywhere. They're shareable, they're portable, they're built upon Nix. It's really, really cool, but they're not one-to-one Nix. Nix is a supply chain. It is underneath the way we're working. We are not trying to build Super Nix. We're not trying to build Nix++. We're not trying to say we're a better version of Nix. No, we're trying to solve SDLC problems while building upon Nix. Our goal and our approach is really to meet the technologists where they're at. And I was going to put developers at first, and then I realized that the SDLC has a lot of components that are not solely focused on developers. If you want to start with using Flox environments in production and in operations for tooling, go for it. We got no problem with that. You want to start in development? That's fine. You want to start in CI? That's fine. We'll meet you where you're at. And then the developer experience is paramount. We want to make sure that developer tools feel good when you use them. I've used so many developer tools in my career, and the bar for good usability in developer tools is lower than this stage I'm standing on. So we think we can be better than that by a lot. That's really what I have to say about the way that Flox has approached things. We're trying to change the user experience. We're trying to change the approachability because of the way that we're not starting with build, and we're actually starting with this traditional SDLC workflow. We have environments that are things that are portable through. And what I'm not going to do is run you through a demo and everything else like that, because I'd rather actually have a conversation with you in a more detailed way if that's what you want. And if you do, there's a booth out in the hall. We'll also have a booth over at Scale at the Expo. We are happy to talk Flox or Nix all day. I have wonderful colleagues over here, over here, over here, over here. You can find anybody. If you see them with a Flox shirt on, they can probably help you. But just, I want to say thanks. You know, this community has been an interesting one to be a part of. My first experience with a Nix person at Darmstadt was I said, hey, this Nix package manager looks pretty cool. And they said, I'm going to stop you right there. Nix is not a package manager. And I got told, well, I was wrong for 35 minutes. So that was not the most welcoming introduction to the Nix community. Since then, it's been a lot better. And so I really appreciated the messaging yesterday from Kelsey and others saying, what are you doing to make this community welcoming and open? And I really want you to think about that. This community is awesome, and it can be awesome, but it's made up of people like you. So just be awesome to each other. All right, thanks. All right. Zach says I have time for questions. If anybody has one, feel free. The question is Flox on Windows. We are really good at the WSL2 part of Windows. The rest of Windows, we have the same concerns that Nix would have on Windows. There is a developer really working on Windows Nix, if you're ever curious. He has a blog. It's really interesting to read. Yes. Oh, their question was, runtime dependencies and build time dependencies are two separate things in Nix. Do you plan to support that at all? Absolutely. There are different ways of doing different things, but yeah, we understand that you do not want, you know, an 800 megabyte closure if you're just going to run something at the end. So, well, yeah. All right, well, thanks so much.